today we are going to learn about timing and biological clocks, biological rhythms, or chronobiology. For every organism, it is very important to know the time of the day or to behave as if they did. For every living organism, it is very important to know the time of the day or to behave as if they know that. Just as living things arrange themselves on the space available, they must also arrange themselves in time. Because the earth revolves around the sun with regularity, rotates at a constant rate on its axis, and has a recurring position in relation to moon, life on earth is subjected to cyclic fluctuations in its environment. Obviously, the life that exists in the changing environment must change so as to behave in the most adaptive manner according to the changing conditions. Knowing well the evolutionary principles, the rhythmical nature should not come as a surprise to biologists because life developed under extremely cyclical conditions. Through the evolution of all living organisms, only those of them survived. Obviously, the life that exists in the changing environment must change so as to behave in the most adaptive manner according to the changing conditions. Knowing well the evolutionary principles, the rhythmical nature should not come as a surprise to biologists because life developed under extremely cyclical conditions. Through the evolution of all living organisms, only those of them survived whose functions were rhythmic. Rhythms are vitally important for all organisms because they enable them to perform certain functions at a time of the day or year which is most suitable for a particular function or activity. In addition, the organism is also informed in advance of the periodic environmental events like flowering in plants or reproduction and migration in animals may take place at a time or season of the year when it is most conducive. According to F. Harburg, president of the World Association of Chronobiologists in 1983, biorhythms are the process which provide the necessary receptacle with the necessary amount of substances in the necessary time. Biorhythms are the processes which provide the necessary receptacle with the necessary amount of substances in the necessary time. Chronobiology, science of living beings, is not only a new but also an amazing subject dealing with cyclical nature of or rhythms of organisms' activity. If honeybees or birds are fed at a particular time in Delhi or Paris, they continue to feed exactly at the same time when flown to New York. Similarly, the astronauts who remained in the orbit for fairly a longer time continue to exhibit daily routines of waking up, sleeping, and other activities. The environmental effects, latitude, longitude, time, or space does not affect them. About 300 years before Aristotle, men wrote about plants that raise their leaves to the sky during the day and fold them at night. The credit for observing biological rhythms is often given to a soldier, Mr. Antrosthenes, in 350 BC in the army of Alexander the Great, who also noted that leaves of certain leguminous plants slept during night and wake up at sunrise. In 1729, French astronomer Mr. A.D. Demarian discovered dark cycles in plants by using the bean plant and touch me not mimosa, and showed that even if the plants were kept in complete darkness, the leaves opened up in the morning and folded up at sunset. In animals, a Swiss physician, Dr. Forel, for the first time recorded that bees possess a time sense since they visited his breakfast table which contained marmalade regularly. Indian physicians realized the importance of time in the physiology and treatment of diseases on as early as 2500 BC. Now, in the era of biorhythms, the medical workers have recognized that the drug should be given to a person in accordance with human biorhythms, since the efficacy of treating depends upon the time when the person takes his pills. William Pfeffer has been considered as father of chronobiology, who studied the leafy movements of the bean plant and concluded that there was a clock within a plant itself which makes the plant aware of the opening and folding time. Kaisel demonstrated the internal clock in animals and also the diurnal rhythms. Further, Professor Dasner and his co-workers demonstrated that red light was the most effective wavelength influencing diurnal rhythm both in plants and animals, and also that these rhythms were independent of temperature and light factors, and that an internal clock exists. Burning and Stern studies internal diurnal clocks rhythms, and later on, after producing an extensive literature on the biological clock, coined the term period for the time between two cycles of activity, one evening to next evening phase, any point in a cycle responsible by interrelation to rest of the cycle. A photofill sense range as differences between maximum and minimum values because each cycle may not be exactly 24 hours. These rhythms are therefore sometimes called as free running rhythms or circadian rhythms. The term used by Franz Hallberg, called as mother of biological clock in animals, she trained bees to feed at a certain time each day, causing the bees to be now informed after 24 hours that it was the time to feed. In nature, most of the rhymes, daily, tidal, lunar, monthly, or annual, etc., are synchronized more or less exactly to some geophysical parameters that varies rhythmically and continuously in time and space. In some cases, the rhythmic external environment or exogenous factors themselves provide the stimuli that initiate and maintain the rhythms in the organisms. In others, the rhythms continue even under a cyclic environment, indicating the presence of a built in mechanism or endogenous mechanism. Now, let's learn about the adaptiveness of rhythms. There are a number of biological rhythms in accordance with many environmental cycles, such as those caused by moon and sun. Rhythms may not be solely related to abiotic influences, they may also be coordinated with the activities of other organisms. Owls hunt mostly at night when the mice are also out, and the mice come out at night when they can't be seen. Differences in rhythms of two species may be important in reducing competition. Fly catching birds and bats are not direct competitors because of the time differences in their feeding behavior, but their food is exactly a bit similar. Some animals show age dependent rhythmicity as they may be active on one time schedule early in their lives and on the other in the later stage of their life. The young otters play in the sun near their den, but as they grow older, they gradually shift their period towards evening and night. Such shifts are obviously accompanied by changes in behavior. Proper coordination in timing, phase relationship among the various internal physiological processes are sometimes critical. Substrates, enzymes, energy sources, and information carrying molecules must appear in properly spaced sequence if the body is to function in a coordinated manner. Biological rhythms are not always coordinated with the onset of some ecological event. The adaptiveness of a particular rhythmic pattern is not apparent when the pattern begins, but in some cases, certain behavior must begin at such a time that it will end at a critical period. A nocturnal animal must stop hunting and begin to undertake its journey back to home so that it may reach the protection of his burrow before daybreak. Now let's learn about timing and reproduction. In many animals, timing is observed in the onset of breeding. Like example, in many birds and mammals, breeding takes place at a time when the young ones are ensured of abundant food supply. In such cases, the timing is regulated by day length. In other cases, the onset of monsoon pulls the trigger for reproduction in fishes, amphibians, etc. Therefore, reproduction or breeding is basically affected by ultimate and proximal factors. The rainfall and light are the proximate factors in the timings of animals. The constant seasonal effects come under the category of ultimate factors. The timing factors are important in three different ways: in bringing sexes together, assuring the greatest number of healthy offsprings, increasing the chances of the parent's survival to the next breeding period, those that have more than one breeding period. Now comes the unexpected rhythms. The most interesting clock finding is that even isolated parts of the organisms are rhythmic. Cell division rhythms and contraction rhythms are found in tissue cultures. A biological clock model, Minaker in 1969, proposed a mechanical model which assumes that daily rhythms behave in much the same way as do some physical oscillators. In this model, behavior of a coiled spring suspended from the rigid surface and weights attached to one end is presented. Various terms associated with this model are explained, like rhythm, the recurring oscillation of the strings, wave-like variations in the behavior, cycle, the repeating unit of the rhythm, then comes the period, length of time necessary to complete one cycle, interval of time between successive peaks in behavior, and a phase, a specific part of a cycle, position of weight at a given point in this cycle. Biological clock model shows that daily rhythms behave in much the same way as do some physical oscillators, up and down movement of coiled springs. The time is shown along the horizontal axis. If external force is applied at some point in the cycle, it causes a phase shift. If sufficient continuous force is applied within a certain period, the oscillator takes up the period of the applied force, showing entrainment. The next term is frequency. Frequency of a rhythm is expressed as the number of peaks in a given period of time. The frequency of peak is after every 5 seconds. Then comes the amplitude, the displacement of the mass or the distance of the weight from the resting position to the farthest point below the resting line. A measure of the magnitude of the change in behavior that occurs between a peak and a baseline. It indicates the results obtained after inducing alterations in the clock model when external force is applied at some point in the cycle. This causes a phase shift which can occur in either direction or to any degree. If the external force increases the velocity of the oscillator, the phase is advanced, causing the weight to reach to a point earlier than it normally would have. If sufficient continuous external force is applied within a period, the oscillator will take the period of the applied force. This response is called the entrainment, drawing after or sweeping or carrying along. Shows that entrainment does not occur immediately, but otherwise the new period is taken up gradually. When the external force is no longer applied, the oscillator will obviously return to its normal period. The above explained model can be demonstrated with an example of a sparrow which was kept under constant darkness and is showed a natural circadian rhythm of 26 hours. The same sparrow was experimentally subjected The same sparrow was experimentally subjected to a cycle of 3 hours of light and 21 hours of darkness. Its activity period then started 35 minutes before the light conditions started each day, the period changing from 26 hours to 24 hours through entrainment. When the light was extended to 11 hours, darkness being for 13 hours, the activity started directly with light, exhibiting a change in phase, that is, the phase shifting. Like oscillators, the rhythmic behavior cycles are modifiable within limits by non environmental factors. Natural cycles are rarely of a 24-hour period and so are out of phase with environmental events. Daily environmental cycles keep the organism's clock continuously set so that behavior phases occur at the appropriate time of day. All plants and animals therefore show the rhythmic behavior even when deprived of the environmental signals. Terminology of rhythmic behavior, we can see a wave and an amplitude is given, a period can be seen, and the frequency is already shown. How is animal circadian rhythm established? It is controlled from within, a function of innate cellular changes, or it is controlled by environmental cues. In general, there are two main ways in which rhythms can arise. They may be driven by a biochemical clock, which is endogenous in the sense that the rhythmic mechanism is independent of the external events. They may be exogenous, entrained rhythmic external stimuli such as daily fluctuations in temperature or light intensity. Now let's learn about the endogenous control concept. Some scientists stated that in the organism studied experimentally, rhythms are innate and inherited properties. The persistence of circadian rhythms under constant conditions is an evidence for an endogenous or internal control mechanism. The endogenous rhythm theory does not rule out the possibility that timing is influenced by geophysical factors. It states that the basic timing is not dependent upon any periodic changes in the environment and that the basic mechanism is innate. This concept is also supported by the view that any internal biological clock probably operates biochemically. All the biochemical reactions proceed at a certain rate, and thus a complete biochemical reaction could correspond to a single rhythmic cycle. In fact, there are cyclic biochemical reactions known in which the end product of a reaction triggers the initiation of new reaction, thereby maintaining the cycle. By objections have been raised to a strictly biochemical reaction by pointing out that an increase in temperature by 10 degrees Celsius doubles the rate of many reactions. It has been then clarified that the temperature has little effect on most biological rhythms. A shift in temperature of 10 degrees Celsius seldom caused a change of 20% in the period. The cold blooded animals, whose body temperature fluctuates with that of the environment, would be unable to develop reliable clocks. Some workers dealing with biological clocks state that the mechanism is based on the rate of protein synthesis. Such a system involves regular synthesis and breakdown of the complex molecular proteins called enzymes. Perhaps the substrates on which enzymes act are the rhythmic components, and the enzymes appear in response to the presence of their substrates. By objections have been raised to strictly biochemical reaction by pointing out that the increase in temperature by 10 degrees Celsius doubles the rate of many reactions. It has been then clarified that temperature has little effect on most biological rhythms. Now let's learn about the exogenous control concept. The exogenous theorists do not rule out the importance of biochemical endogenous clocks, but they argue that the endogenous timer is sensitive to environmental factors and the intracellular rhythm occurs in response to cyclic geophysical changes. Brown, in 1970, formulated a two-layered ring-like model in which there is a core of unchanging geophysical cycles existing under changeable system that can be affected by light, temperature, and food. The outer ring is the source of patterns that fill the organism to its environment. It is well known that several diverse geophysical phenomena are cyclic in nature and therefore could be furnishing information to the inner ring. The most important are those that fluctuate daily: temperature, light and dark cycles, etc. Besides, there are more complex geophysical cycles, tides in the ocean. The rhythmic organism can be drawn as a circle where the light, temperature, food, etc. are shown in the outer circle. Then the external environment, solar, lunar and annual rhythms are shown. Then the magnetic field, electrostatic field and gamma radiation field are also shown. So geophysically independent rhythms are there and adjustable physiological rhythms are also there. Twofold basis of biological rhythms. പൂവായി sorry Twofold basis of biological rhythms represented by Brown's model for exogenous theory. The outer ring controls circadian, tidal and patterns that fits the animals to its environment, and the inner ring shows the source of primal patterns responding to rhythms of the geophysical environment. There are different kinds of rhythms. So based on the annual seasonal cycles, daily environmental changes or those corresponding with lunar cycle, the rhythms may broadly be classified into circannual rhythms, circadian rhythms, lunar and tidal rhythms. So first we are going to look at the circannual rhythms. Most of the animals of world adjust their behavior on an annual basis, avoiding unfavorable period by annual migration or hibernation and taking advantage of favorable period or season by organizing their reproductive behavior. The term circannual is thus used to refer to a rhythm which has a period of about 1 year. In some species, it have been shown that such annual changes in behavior are based upon endogenous biological clock. Marine polyp shows an annual cycle of growth, development and longevity under constant laboratory conditions, excluding exogenous influence. European warblers also show endogenous circannual rhythms, also shown as endogenous circannual rhythms. Some of the warblers are long distance migrants which show marked seasonal changes in body weight, moult, fat accumulation, pesticides, nocturnal resistance, and food preferences. These birds winter in Africa and migrate across the Sahara Desert. When they are maintained under laboratory conditions, the normal seasonal changes associated with migration still occur. Similar results have been obtained on the study of white-crowned sparrows, which spend their spring in Canada and northern United States, going as far as Mexico. The behavioral and physiological cycle of white-crowned sparrow, as given, can form an understanding basis of other birds too. It appears that there is an innate endogenous circannual block which is responsible for the timing of the physiological and behavioral changes associated with migration. Studies have also been done on the seasonal rhythms of reproductive activity in birds, and most of them have suggested the involvement of endogenous process. Most of the studies are mainly concerned with those subjects which breed exclusively in the temperate zones, where an annual breeding cycle is likely to have high survival value because of sharp alterations between favorable and unfavorable seasons. At equator, where there are less marked changes in climate and there are seasonally stable food supplies, it is advantageous to maintain reproductive cycles continuously. Nevertheless, some equatorial species show a marked breeding rhythm not concerning with seasonal changes. Some marine birds like sooty tern and lesser noddy tern breed at an interval of 8 to 10 months in equatorial conditions. The progressive shift between such breeding cycles and seasonal cycles suggests that there is no one preferred season, but they are benefited by inherent property of breeding. In mammals, including man too, there are marked physiological changes correlated with the seasons as well as endogenous factors. A well marked circannual rhythm has been observed in western North American ground squirrel, also found from northern British Columbia to southern Columbia. Under natural conditions, they hibernate for 3 to 4 months, during which body weight falls. After hibernation, food consumption reaches at its peak in midsummer, leading to increase in body weight till October, after which they again hibernate. This hibernating regularity was also confirmed in laboratory conditions, keeping all the external factors as constant as possible. So, circannual rhythms enable the animals to anticipate seasonal changes in environmental conditions, such as a mechanism helps maintaining accurate timing of events, particularly at places where climatic factors may vary year to year. Such adjustments are quite beneficial while undertaking migration, hibernation, and reproductive activity. Now let's learn about the circadian rhythms. While adjusting to the differences between night and day, an animal also organizes its behavior according to a daily routine or rhythm. Most animals are directly affected by the changes in climatic conditions between night and day, such as temperature and light intensity, but indirect effects are also not uncommon. Through fluctuations in food availability and numbers of predators, studies on daily rhythms of animals have indicated that they are controlled by endogenous clock, which is often retrained to exogenous factors. The daily rhythms are thus synchronized with local conditions. Studies on a lizard have synchronized with local conditions. The studies on a lizard have indicated that they maintained a regular 24-hour rhythm if placed in incubator just after hatching until a temperature and light regime designated to correspond to a day length of 60 and 36 hours respectively. This kind of pattern showing a period of about one day is called circadian rhythm. In the physical environment, the daily rhythms make some activities advantageous at one time and disadvantageous at another. It is advantageous for small animals to be nocturnal in a hot climate, avoidance of activity in the heat of the day. It can also be advantageous for small animals to be active at night when temperatures are low in cold climate because of the fact that their period of heat production coincides with the colder part of the day, and the period of activity is thus harnessed as a means of thermoregulation. And a period of activity is this harnessed as a means of thermoregulation. It is advantageous to be active in the daytime, especially if they are able to sleep in a warm nest at night. Diurnal animals are those animals which are adapted for daytime vision. may be in disadvantageous situation at night because of inability of feeding and danger of predators. They have advantages of sleeping at night. Sleep provides an opportunity to conserve energy and avoidance of predators. It has been suggested that a daily routine is controlled by endogenous circadian clock, and these routines can be altered by learning and by changing seasons of the year. In bats, which are nocturnal, total activity period remains longer in winters. Nights are longer in winters than in summer. Conversely, a diurnal animal has the activity period tends to be shorter in winter. The birds, the activity period, migration, etc., are largely governed by photoperiods. Now comes the lunar and tidal rhythms. Most marine animals show rhythms of behavior that coincide with the tidal cycle. As evident geographically, the tides result from changes in the combined gravitational pull of the sun and moon. The tidal cycle is repeated twice in the lunar cycle of 29.5 days for about 7 days after the full moon. The sun and moon move progressively out of line and the tides progressively slow down until sun and moon are at right angles relative to earth. Although the general pattern of tidal rhythm is the same around the world, it can be modified considerably by local conditions. In an annelid, reproductive activity has been reported to occur during the neap tides of shorter range of the last quarter of moon in October and November. The freshwater guppy has a rhythm of change in special spectral sensitivity, color vision, and in terrestrial beetle of genus Calandra has cycle of phototaxis responsiveness, both corresponding to the lunar cycle. Both corresponding to the lunar cycle. For about 7 days after the full moon, the sun and moon more progressively move out of line and the tides progressively slow down until sun and moon are at right angles relative to earth. Although the general pattern of tidal rhythm is the same around the world, it will be modified considerably by local conditions. The fiddler crabs emerge from their burrows at low tide and show very active feeding and courtship acts. Under constant laboratory conditions, this act persists for 5 weeks, and a small Californian fish spawn 3 or 4 days after full moon, a time corresponding to the highest tides of the month. 1 to 3 hours after the tides begin to recede, the females, chased by males, ride the incoming waves on their way to sea beach, where they bury their tails in the sand to deposit eggs. The males swim across the females to release the sperms. The buried eggs are then protected from the dangers of the sea until the next spring tide, just after 1 month, when the waves carry the youngs to the sea. Now let's learn about the photoperiod oriented circannual and circadian rhythms. Photoperiod and migration. In tropical and subtropical India, where daily and annual variations in temperature and photoperiod are not large, the birds exhibit circadian and the circannual rhythms. In general, increase in day length from February, March, and onward in India induces Siberian birds to migrate to north to their feeding habitat Siberia. On the contrary, decrease in photoperiod from September October onwards induces the Siberian birds to migrate to Indian subcontinent because the days are considerably shorter in Siberia during winter and they can be found to get food. Rowan was first to show experimentally the importance of photoperiod in bird migration when by subjecting Junco hyemalis to long photoperiod, he succeeded in inducing migratory behavior and gonad development at Alberta, Canada during cold winter months. Since then, photoperiodic control of a number of other events in many more animals has been examined. A migratory bird in the north in midsummer was kept in a cage covered in a manner to shed out the light for a part of each day. This provided it an artificially short day, similar to length to those occurring in September or October. When this bird was released from the cage, it started its southward migration. The foregoing account therefore explains why certain migratory birds, like Siberian birds, arrive at a certain place at about the same time each year, even though weather conditions may vary considerably from one year to another. By tagging devices, it has been proved by the ornithologists that some Siberian birds definitely migrate to the specific part of the Indian subcontinent at almost exactly the same day each year. Some experiments in this direction have demonstrated that it is the photoperiod or the amount of daylight which induces migration in birds and other associated gonadal and pituitary changes. In the weaver bird, long photoperiods are gonadostimulatory and short days are non-stimulatory. However, when birds were exposed to a basic non-stimulatory 6 light hours and 18 dark hours, photoperiod and the dark phase was interrupted by light pulses of 15 minutes at 6, 8, 11, 14, and 24, 21 hours after the beginning of the basic light period. Gonadal stimulation occurred in birds that received the pulse at 11 hours. Further, when birds on 8 light hour and 11 dark hour phases were shifted to 10-hour and 12-hour pulses and their tests examined, it became evident that unlike in high altitude latitude birds, in tropical Baya and length of the light sensitive period during the day when gonad stimulation occurs is very short. Obviously, the bird can distinguish between 10, 11, 12, and 21 hours of photoperiod. Such short photo inducible phase in our birds. The bird thus has a light sensitivity rhythm which when entrained by photoperiod can help it to measure day length and hence to time its reproduction. In another set of experiment by Kentola et al. In 1976 called resonance experiment, it became clear that the sensitivity phase recurs regularly at 24 hours interval. Similar results have been reported in Indian finches, the spotted munia that breeds during autumn. In an experiment, 3 groups of spotted munia were subjected to a natural light-dark schedule of 3 hours of dark alternating with 24 hours of light. The light period was then interrupted with a single short dark pulse of 50 minutes only at 4, 8, and 22 hours after the beginning of the dark phase. A fourth group was maintained under natural photo period. The response pattern clearly indicated the involvement of a distinct endogenous circadian sensitivity rhythm to light or absence of light in the bird. Kaplial in 1980 indicated that buntings which migrate during the spring towards northwest for reproduction use an annual clock that underlies the annual sensitivity rhythm to light. Normally, short photoperiods inhibit and long photoperiods stimulate gonadal development and deposition of fat in this bird. But this response to photoperiod varies during different months of the year. It is minimum during winter months and as spring approaches increases gradually until it becomes very high during March or April. It is thus obvious that even in low altitude India, animals possess rhythms, circadian and circannual of the activity and behavior which they use to time their daily and annual physiological activity cycles. Weight and development of testes in Django under natural day lengths beginning December 4 is shown. The numbers above each point indicate the stage of spermatogenesis. Each point represents individual. So here we can see a graph which is going upward and then into a minimum point. The long-term migrants like Arctic tern, which migrates from North Pole to South Pole and makes a yearly round of world trip of about 45,000 kilometers, are not exception to using the sunshine hours as cue to their migration. It nests in the summer across the Atlantic, down the west coasts of Europe and Africa, and finally to the Antarctic region. These animals spend both winter and summer near the poles at a time when the sun never sets. Such a behavior pattern of migration gives them a maximum daylight at all the time. This helps them not only to survive the extremes of temperature but also gives them longer periods of feeding, because birds feed only during light and go to place of resting during darkness. Arctic tern has regulated its migration in such a way that it is in the Arctic region in summer and the Antarctic region in northern winter. During this period, sun shines for all the 24 hours, and thus these animals have longer periods for their feeding. Workers have suggested that the migratory behavior of birds is under the hormonal control from the gonads. Workers have suggested that the migratory behavior of birds is under the hormonal control from the gonads, and that some birds migrate to north in spring when their gonadal activity increases and southward after breeding season. This is found associated with regression in gonadal activity. There are arguments both in favor and against this suggestion. Northward migration of European starling is associated with increased gonadal activity, but these birds also migrate even if their gonads are removed. These facts therefore suggest that it is not the gonadal activity which initiates migration but something else, which not only induces migration but seems to be associated with increased gonadal activity. On the other hand, it has been suggested that migration is associated with cyclic changes in pituitary. Cytological examination of pituitary of juncos has revealed some interesting observations. Northward migration of them during spring is not only associated with increased gonadal activity, but their pituitary is also more active. In addition, these birds have a tendency for heavy fat deposition and their weight is also increased. The increased gonadal activity, increased pituitary activity, increase in weight due to fat deposition are definitely associated with the behavior of migration, but they do not seem to be the sole cause of migration. In some birds, it is the amount of daylight or the photoperiod which first initiates hormonal changes, activation of pituitary, gonads, etc., and then induces migration. The main cause of breeding seasons of birds in nature are temperature, length of day, rainfall, etc. The breeding season in birds is correlated with food availability, regarded as an adaptation which is timed in such a way that the young can be reared when food supply is at a maximum. Birds living in the area of North or South Pole, where winters are very severe and food supply is short, try to escape this hazard by migration to comparatively lesser cold places where day length is sufficiently long to allow them sufficient feeding time for their survival. Since the mechanism helped these migratory birds in their survival, it was retained as a genetic trait by virtue of genetic selection. It is the biological clock which regulates the behavior of migration in these birds, and that they actually navigate by means of the position of the sun and stars and can make allowance for the changes in their relative periods through an internal time mechanism or the so-called biological clock. I will be repeating this. The main cause of breeding seasons of birds in nature are temperature, light of day, rainfall, etc. The breeding season in birds is correlated with food availability, regarded as an adaptation which is timed in such a way that the young can be reared when food supply is at a maximum. Birds living in the area of North or South Pole, where winters are very severe and food supply is short, try to escape this hazard by migration to comparatively lesser cold places where day length is sufficiently long to allow them sufficient feeding time for their survival. Since this mechanism helped these migratory birds in their survival, it was retained as a genetic trait by virtue of genetic selection. It is a biological clock which regulates the behavior of migration in these birds, and that they actually navigate by means of the position of the sun and stars and can make allowance for the changes in their relative positions to an internal time mechanism or the so-called biological clock. In white-crowned sparrow, it has been found that if the bird is blinded or eyes are covered, its normal circadian pattern does not change. In white-crowned sparrow, it has been found that if the bird is blinded or eyes are covered, its normal circadian pattern does not change. It will respond to changing day length. How can a blinded bird be sensitive to light? It has been suggested that birds' light timer is located in the hypothalamus, and the photoreceptors that stimulate the hypothalamus are located in the brain itself, in the pineal body. Suppose the birds were placed under light conditions ranging from 12 to 13 hours. This means that the photosensitive period would never be activated because there will be no light available during the light sensitive period of the cycle. If the light periods were increased to 40 to 15 hours, light would reach the brain during sensitive period, thus stimulating the hypothalamus to release the hormones which activate the pituitary to release in turn the gonadotropins and prolactin. The former stimulate the gonads to develop and exert their own physiological and behavioral effects. Simultaneously, there is a strong evidence that pineal body secretes a substance called melatonin, which in turn has been found to stimulate melanophores to contract and initiate melanin concentrations in action opposite to that of the MSH from pituitary. Besides, melatonin is also said to act upon gonads. Its increased secretion delays sexual maturation of immature animals. Its increased secretion delays sexual maturation of immature animals. Exposure to high inhibits in exposure to light inhibits production of melatonin, resulting into fast maturation, while exposure to darkness stimulates melatonin secretion in large amounts, thereby delaying maturation. In other words, it may be said that the secretion of melatonin varies according to how long the organism stays in dark or light. The seasonal characters and sexual activity of certain animals, particularly birds, increase in the spring and summer because of the fact that during the later the photoperiod and intensity of light increases with decrease in melatonin secretion, and intensity of light increases with decrease in melatonin secretion. The seasonal characters and sexual activity of certain animals increase in the spring and summer because of the fact that during the later the photoperiod and intensity of light increases with decrease in melatonin secretion and resulting into fast maturation and increased sexual urge. The pineal body is regulated by photoperiod, or it may better be called as biological clock. Biological clock of unicellular organisms. Because of shorter span of life, unicellular organisms generally show circadian rhythms. Many types of circadian rhythms have been reported in them, some of which are listed in the table. These are evident that, like unicellular organisms, the clock is also be found in single cells as tissue culture cells from these organisms continue to show their original rhythm as unexplained and unexpected rhythms. The endogenous nature of bioluminescence rhythm in Goniolax, the phototactic rhythm in Chlamydomonas and Goniolax, and cell division cycle in Euglena in contact in constant light and temperature has been reported. The circadian rhythms shown by some unicellular organisms: photosynthesis, chloroplast shape, ADP content and chloroplasts, number of carbohydrate granules in chloroplasts, chloroplast division, polysaccharide content of cells and RNA synthesis, phototactic elements, phototactic movements and cell division, mating, phototactic movements, photosynthesis, bioluminescence and cell division in case of goniolax, mating in case of paramecium, euglena, phototactic movements and cell division in case of euglena, and chlamydomonas, phototactic movements and vertical migration is also seen. As explained earlier, changes in temperature have very little effect on these rhythms. The periods may be slightly shortened or lengthened. The temperature coefficient Q10 for growth in acetabular cell is 2.2, which indicates that an increase or decrease of 10 raised to 10 degrees Celsius increases or decreases the rate of reaction by a factor of nearly 2. The Q10 for circadian rhythm of oxygen evolution acetabular and bioluminescence goniolax is near 0.8. Molecular mechanism of circadian rhythms. Periodic alternations in the membrane, visualized directly by electron microscope, suggested their involvement in circadian rhythms. Now let's learn about the molecular mechanisms of circadian rhythms. Periodic alterations in the membranes, visualized directly by electron microscope, suggest their involvement in circadian rhythms. Since membranes play a central role in the circadian rhythm of bioluminescence in goniolax and photosynthesis in acetabular, a periodic alteration in the membrane is supposed to accompany these rhythms. Diurnal changes in the shape and structure of thylakoids in chloroplasts of acetabular and goniolax have been reported. The role of membranes in circadian rhythm is also supported by the observation of clock disturbing effect of digitonin and alcohol which act on membranes. A number of models have been proposed to explain the molecular basis of circadian rhythm, but some scientists have proposed coupled translation membrane model which is widely accepted. The essential feature of this model is that circadian oscillations depend on quantitative and qualitative changes in the protein composition of the membranes. The changes in the protein pattern require assembly, synthesis of essential proteins, and loading of the membrane, and disassembly, unloading, and degradation of the essential proteins. The degree of loading and the resulting change in the functional state of the membrane are coupled to the assembly by a feedback mechanism so that extensive loading of the membrane with the protein reduces their rate of assembly and vice versa. The loading of the membrane would require a long period which is supposed to account for the basis of 24-hour circadian rhythm. Experiments in acetabular have demonstrated that in the presence of inhibitors of translation such as puromycin or cycloheximide, the photosynthesis rhythm disappears but returns on removal of these inhibitors. The inability of chloramphenicol to affect the rhythm was shown that only proteins synthesized on the ATS ribosomes are essential to maintain the rhythm. Therefore, the properties of the essential proteins can be defined as synthesis on ATS ribosomes, synthesis only during a distinct time period in the circadian cycle, and inhibition of synthesis by cycloheximide. A periodically appearing protein has in fact been isolated from the membranes of chloroplasts of acetabular. However, it has not been proved to be an essential protein. Based on the above model, some features of the circadian rhythm can be explained, such as periodicity of circadian rhythms, its endogenous character, and temperature compensation. Now let's learn about the biorhythms in man. Rhythms are very important for human too, as also for other living organisms. Just as an unturned piano usually results in a bad performance, untuned piano, I'm sorry, just as an untuned piano usually results in a bad performance. A disturbed biorhythm is also a disease. It is an indication of the onset of a disease and even helps assess the degree of recovery, since there are cases in which the conventional indications of health point towards recovery, while biorhythms show the after effects of disease. Within every human being is a set of biological clock or biorhythms whose subtle chemical tickling helps to govern governing the normal daily rise and fall of temperature, the production of important hormones and other substances, and such basic urges as sleep and hunger. These rhythms influence behavioral patterns in all living things, human as well as animals and plants. Thus determine the efficiency of the body in the performance of certain functions at particular time of the day or the year. Biorhythms are themselves determined by one's habits and environments. For each change, for each assertion made to adjust to a new environment, man must pay with the deterioration in the functioning of his body. Now we are going to learn about the desynchronism. Desynchronism. While disturbing natural biorhythms, a disease sets its own rhythms. For example, in the case of pneumonia, the patient's rate of breathing increases and thus he consumes more energy and disturbs the oxygenation of blood and the excretion of carbonic acid and other waste matters. All this results in the retardation of the vital activities of cells. Thus, disorders in biorhythms are called desynchronism. If we repeatedly disturb the change from light to darkness, or decreases the day to 21 hours, or increase to 27 hours, we will shorten our lifespan. If we repeatedly disrupt the change from light to darkness, or decrease the day to 21 hours, or increase to 27 hours, we will shorten our lifespan. The weird upsetting of state in which sleeping alternates with being awake causes insomnia or sleeplessness and disease of nerve system. Alcohol and smoking also lead to desynchronism because they disturb the fine functional regulation of man's organs. Experts have concluded that more than 100 bodily functions are affected when one's biorhythm is disturbed. Normal rhythms will not be in synchrony. Cycles of body temperature, breathing, heartbeats, not hormonal output, urine and blood constituents, and central nerve system, chemical activities of the kidneys, the liver, the digestive tract would all be affected adversely by biorhythm disruption. The studies conducted at Albert Einstein College in New York, the Sleep Research Center of Stanford University, and the Harvard Medical School have indicated that biological clock dictates sleep according to body temperature. People who work at irregular hours, like pilots, nurses, drivers, etc., have their sleeping hours anachronous with their biological cycle of temperature and are thus unable to have a sound sleep. As a result, one who have gone for long periods without sleep cannot sleep extra hours to make up. If he sleeps earlier than usual, thus breaking the temperature cycle, he will have fitful sleep only. People who sleep long, say for 16 hours, do so because they sleep through two cycles for lack of an effective body wake up signal. Interesting findings have been made about the biorhythm upsets caused by jet travel through the changes in time zones, and in a few hours, four or more time zones may be crossed. One may set his watch easily, but it is very difficult to set body timings. Multi time zone travelers find themselves hungry and sleep at a wrong time. They are alert when they are asleep. They are alert when they are asleep and sluggish when they need to react quickly. They may also lose appetite and feel lethargic and disturbed in sexual functioning. When one lands from New York to New Delhi, he lands exactly half a day off. The day is night and night is day. Such sudden changes are not expected to have occurred at the time of human evolution, therefore, they are not equipped to make the necessary adjustments so rapidly. So, that is why we should not alter our sleep cycle. Circadian and circannular aspects. It is very tempting to check a man's health through his biorhythms. A patient is brought to hospital at night. His blood test shows a steep increase in leukocytes. Apart from clinical symptoms, this may prompt a surgeon to operate. But a doctor is deluded when he finds their number constantly changes all through the day, reaching its peak at night and in early morning. This case deals with the fluctuations over a day, but